On September 3rd, 2009, the world said goodbye to Michael Jackson. But what no one was prepared for was what would be discovered inside his tomb hours after the ceremony ended. A discovery so personal, so emotional, that several members of his family collapsed in tears when they finally understood what it meant. Why had Michael left it there? Who was it really meant for? And what final message did it reveal about the man the world thought it knew? The truth remained buried for years, until now. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Michael Jackson. Forest Lawn Memorial Park, Glendale, California, September 3rd, 2009. The sky was impossibly blue. Not the soft kind of blue that matches grief. The sharp, blinding blue of a day that refuses to mourn with you. Thousands of fans surrounded the gates, holding candles, photographs, white gloves, handwritten letters. Some cried openly. Some stood in complete silence. Some whispered his name over and over, as if saying it enough times might make him return. Inside the private sanctuary, only a small group of people were allowed to enter. Michael's family, a few lifelong friends, and the unbearable absence of the man they were all there for. The casket was closed. Gold. Reflective. Heavy. Katherine Jackson sat in the front row, holding a white handkerchief that had already been soaked through. Her eyes never left the casket. Her lips moved constantly, whispering prayers only a mother could form. Paris and Prince sat beside her, their hands folded tightly in their laps, their faces too young for this moment. Rebby Jackson kept her arm around Janet. Tito stared at the floor. Jackie didn't blink for what felt like hours. And in the back row, alone, sat a man Michael had trusted with his deepest fears, his longtime assistant, Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan's hands were shaking, because Jonathan knew something no one else in that room knew. 2 days earlier, the night before the funeral, Jonathan had received a call from Forest Lawn's director. "We found something inside the mausoleum chamber," the man had said. "It was sealed in the wall, directly behind where the casket will be placed. The instructions were specific. It is to be opened only after service, and only in the presence of the Jackson family." Jonathan's heart had nearly stopped. He had driven to the cemetery at midnight. Inside the dimly lit marble corridor, the director had shown him the narrow recess behind the crypt. Hidden inside was a small metal box, wrapped in white cloth. On the top of it, written in careful handwriting, "For when the world has said goodbye." MJ. Jonathan hadn't opened it. He couldn't. Now. As the soft music of the service floated through the hall, Jonathan's mind kept returning to that box. What had Michael left behind? Why hide it there? And why had he made sure it wouldn't be discovered until this exact moment, after the world believed everything was over? The minister's voice faded into the background as Jonathan's heart began to race. He looked at Katherine, at Michael's children, at the casket, and he realized something that sent a chill through his spine. This funeral was not the end of Michael Jackson's story. It was the beginning of his final message. And in less than an hour, the people in that room would hear a truth that would change the way they remembered him forever. What was inside that hidden box would break their hearts and heal them at the same time. The service ended in silence. No applause, no music, only the sound of quiet sobs and the soft echo of shoes against marble. The family rose slowly. Katherine was the last to stand. She touched the gold surface of the casket once, her fingers trembling, then pressed her palm against her chest as if trying to hold her heart together. Michael's children followed her. When the sanctuary doors closed behind the final guest, the atmosphere changed. The world outside continued crying and singing and begging for Michael to return. Inside, the truth waited. Jonathan approached Katherine. "Mrs. Jackson," he said gently, "there's something Michael arranged. It needs to be done now, in private." Katherine looked at him, confusion flickering through her grief. "What do you mean?" He swallowed. "Please, just the family." They followed him through a narrow corridor behind the mausoleum, the cool air smelling faintly of stone and roses. A small side chamber waited at the end, empty, quiet, sealed off from the rest of the building. The director unlocked the chamber and gestured toward the back wall. "There," he said, hidden behind a marble panel. Inside a recessed compartment that no one would ever notice without knowing exactly where to look was a small metal box wrapped in white cloth. Janet gasped. Rebbe covered her mouth. Tito whispered, "What is this?" Jonathan stepped forward, his hands shaking as he lifted the box from its hiding place. The weight of it surprised him. It was heavier than it looked. On the lid, in Michael's handwriting, were the words, "For when the world has said goodbye." Catherine's breath caught. "Oh, Michael!" Jonathan placed the box on a small stone bench in the center of the room. "Before he passed," Jonathan said, his voice barely steady, "Michael told me there was something he had prepared. He said the time would be when the world believed his story was finished." Paris looked up. Why would he hide something here? Jonathan met her eyes. Because he knew this is where everyone would finally listen. He carefully removed the cloth and opened the box. Inside were three things: a leather-bound journal, a folded letter sealed in ivory wax, and a small velvet pouch. No one spoke. The air itself felt like it was holding its breath. Jonathan picked up the letter first. The seal bore Michael's initials, MJ. He handed it to Catherine. "Michael asked that you read this out loud." Catherine's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Her voice was quiet at first, then stronger. "My beautiful family, if you are hearing this, then I am no longer where you can see me. But I am exactly where I need to be. Please don't cry too long. I carried love with me when I left this world, and love is what I leave with you." Janet's shoulders began to shake. "I know the world believes it knows my story, but the world never knew my heart. This box holds the pieces of me I could never give the public. I trust you to keep them safe, and when the time is right, to let them speak." Tears streamed down Catherine's face. "I hid this here because this is the only moment when noise becomes silence. This is the only place where truth can finally breathe." She lowered the letter. The room was broken with grief. Jonathan gently lifted the journal. "This is his," he said. "He wrote in it almost every night for years." Paris reached for it. "Can I see?" Jonathan nodded. She opened the first page. Michael's handwriting filled the paper, careful, rounded, almost childlike. They clapped for the man on the stage. "But the boy inside me is always alone." Prince closed his eyes. Jonathan then opened the velvet pouch and poured its contents into his palm. Inside lay a small silver locket. Catherine recognized it instantly. It was a locket Michael had worn on and off since the late 1970s, the one no one had ever been allowed to open. Jonathan held it out to her. Catherine took it with shaking fingers. Inside were two tiny photographs. One of Michael at age 8, smiling on stage with the Jackson 5. The other of Michael as a grown man, sitting on the floor at Neverland, holding his children in his arms. Janet whispered, "Why hide this?" Jonathan's voice cracked. Because he believed the world only saw one version of him. He wanted his family to remember the truth. The journal, the letter, the locket, all of it was Michael's final confession. And then Jonathan turned the journal to the last written page. At the bottom of it, a sentence written only weeks before his death. "When I am gone, I hope they finally understand I was not lonely because I was famous. I was lonely because I was human." No one in the room could breathe. Jonathan closed the journal. "But there's more," he said quietly. They all looked at him. Michael had left one final instruction, and what was about would change the meaning of his goodbye forever. The real reason for this box had not yet been revealed. The room remained frozen after Jonathan's last words. Michael had left one final instruction. Catherine lifted her face, eyes red but focused. "What did he say, Jonathan?" Jonathan hesitated. His throat tightened. He said, "There was something in the box that could not be opened yet, and that when it finally was, it would explain everything he never had the courage to say out loud." Janet stepped forward. "What do you mean, not opened yet?" "We already opened it." Jonathan shook his head. "Not all of it." He reached back into the box and removed a second envelope that had been hidden beneath the lining. This one was thicker, sealed with the same ivory wax, and marked only with the word, "Later." Prince frowned. "Later when—" Jonathan looked at Catherine. "When the children are older, when they can understand the truth without it hurting them." Paris's voice trembled. We're here. We're listening. Why not now? Jonathan swallowed, because Michael was afraid. Of what? Tito asked. Jonathan answered quietly. Of breaking their hearts. Catherine reached out and touched the envelope. What is it, Jonathan? He lowered his eyes. It's his confession. No one spoke. Jonathan continued. He wrote it after a night at Neverland when he couldn't sleep. He said the world had taken so much from him that he didn't know what part of himself was still untouched. That letter, it explains who he really was when no one was watching. Janet whispered, Why would he hide that from us? Jonathan met her gaze. He didn't hide it from you. He hid it from the world, and he wasn't sure the world deserved it yet. Catherine closed her eyes. He was always protecting everyone else. Jonathan nodded, even in death. They sat together in that cold stone room, the journal resting on Catherine's lap, the locket in her hand, the unopened envelope between them like a living thing. Finally, Rebbe asked, What do we do now? Jonathan took a breath. Michael's instructions were clear. The journal is for you. The locket is for the children. And the sealed letter stays with the family until the time is right. Paris wiped her eyes. How do we know when that is? Jonathan said, Michael wrote that the moment would come when the world would start remembering the legend but forgetting the man. He said when that happens, you open it. Catherine's voice broke. They already do that. Jonathan nodded. I know. They stayed in the chamber for a long time, speaking quietly, sharing memories, touching the pieces Michael had left behind. Every page of the journal revealed a man desperate to be understood, desperate to belong, desperate to be loved without conditions. On one page, Michael had written, Sometimes I think my life is a long performance where I am applauded for everything except the truth. Another, if I ever stop singing, I hope someone remembers the boy who just wanted to make people smile. Paris traced the words with her finger. He was so alone. Catherine closed the journal. Not anymore. When they finally left the chamber, the sun was setting outside Forest Lawn. Fans still stood at the gates, candles flickering in the dusk. None of them knew what had just been uncovered beneath the marble. That night, Catherine took the box home. She placed it in Michael's old bedroom at Havernest, on the table beside the bed where he had once slept as a child. She opened the journal again, alone, and as she read, she began to understand something that shook her deeply. Michael had known he was dying, not in fear, in preparation. On the final page of the journal, written only days before his passing, were these words. If this is the end of my road, I want my family to know that every tear, every sacrifice, every lonely night was worth it if it meant I could give the world something beautiful. Catherine pressed the page to her heart, but what the sealed letter contained, that was still waiting. And its message would soon rise to the surface in a way none of them could stop, because Michael's final truth was never meant to remain buried. Years passed. The noise of the world moved on, as it always does. Michael Jackson's music still filled radios, movies, stadiums, commercials. His face remained everywhere. But slowly, quietly, something else began to fade. The man. Catherine noticed it first in interviews. They spoke of his dance moves, his records, his gloves, his costumes. They spoke of the legend, but almost no one spoke of the boy who couldn't sleep, the father who read bedtime stories, the man who cried when children were hurting. In living rooms and documentaries, his life was being edited into something simpler, safer, smaller. Catherine sat alone one evening, watching a special about Michael's career. When it ended, she turned off the television and stared at the reflection of her own face in the dark screen. They're forgetting you, she whispered. In the hallway, the box waited. She went to Michael's old bedroom and opened it, the journal, the locket, the sealed letter marked later. Her fingers rested on the letter for a long time. Jonathan's words echoed in her mind. When the world starts remembering the legend but forgetting the man, that's when you open it. Catherine took a breath. Down the hall, Prince, Paris, and Blanket were older now. They had grown into themselves with a grace that still amazed her. They were no longer children. They were young adults carrying their own questions about their father. Catherine called them into the room. They sat on Michael's bed, the same bed he had once slept in after coming home from tour, exhausted, hiding from a world. Catherine placed a sealed letter on the blanket. "This is from your father," she said. Paris's eyes filled instantly. "We've never seen it before." "He didn't want you to," Catherine replied. "Not until now." She broke the seal. Her voice trembled as she began to read. "My beautiful children, if you are reading this, then time has passed and the world has moved forward without me. I hope you have grown into who you were meant to be. I hope you are kind to yourselves. I hope you never doubt that you were the greatest miracle of my life." Prince swallowed hard. "There are things I could never explain while I was alive. I tried, but fear and pain and noise always stood between my heart and my words. So I leave them here, where they cannot be interrupted." Paris squeezed Blanket's hand. "I was not perfect. I was often scared. I was often lonely. But loving you was the one place where I was never lost." Catherine paused to steady herself. "I want you to know that every decision I made, even the ones that hurt me, I made to protect you. Even when the world was cruel, I wanted your childhood to be gentle." Tears slid down Prince's face. "Do not let anyone tell you who I was. You knew me. Hold on to that. And when you hear my songs, do not think of the stages or the lights. Think of the nights we laughed on the floor and the mornings we watched cartoons together." Paris began to sob. "I am proud of you, more than I was ever proud of myself. And wherever I am with you. Always." Catherine's voice broke completely. She folded the letter. The room was silent except for the sound of the children crying. Paris whispered. He knew he was leaving. Catherine nodded. Yes, he did. They held each other for a long time, and in that moment, the story Michael had buried beneath the stone finally began to breathe. But the world would not remain silent forever, because soon the letter would no longer belong only to them. And when it reached the public, it would change the way Michael Jackson was remembered forever. Cliffhanger. The letter was never meant for the world, but the world was already circling. Weeks after Catherine read Michael's words to his children, subtle shifts began happening around them. Journalists called more often. Producers requested interviews about the real Michael. Old friends suddenly wanted to speak. Documentaries resurfaced, promising new revelations. The legend was being reshaped again. And yet, something inside Catherine knew the story was incomplete. One afternoon, she invited Jonathan Pierce back to Havenhurst. They sat in Michael's old bedroom, the box resting on the table between them like a heartbeat. "They're starting to forget who he really was," Catherine said quietly. Jonathan nodded. He predicted that. She looked at the box. "What else did he leave?" Jonathan opened the journal again. He turned to a section Catherine had not yet read aloud. Michael's handwriting slanted across the page, urgent but gentle. "If my children are grown and the world has turned me into something unrecognizable, let them decide what part of me deserves to live on." Catherine closed her eyes. He was ready for this moment. That night, Paris couldn't sleep. She wandered the halls until she reached her father's room. She opened the journal on the bed and began reading alone. Page after page revealed not a star, but a man afraid of being misunderstood, a man who loved deeply, a man who was exhausted by the noise of the world, but still believed in kindness. She found a page dated only weeks before his passing. "I don't fear death. I fear being remembered for something I am not." Paris pressed her palm against the words. "I won't let them do that to you," she whispered. The next day, Prince made a decision. He contacted a small publishing group known for memoirs, not celebrities, but human stories. "I have something that matters," he told them. "Not for fame, for truth." They agreed to read the journal. Months later, the announcement came. A book. The Man Behind the Moonwalk. The Private Writings of Michael Jackson. The world stopped. The media exploded. Fans cried. Critics argued. But when the first pages were released, the noise changed. Because the voice they heard was not a legend. It was a lonely, beautiful human being. Letters poured in. From parents. From children. From artists. from people who had been saved by his music and were now discovering the man behind it. One message arrived at Havenhest. Your father taught me how to survive my childhood. Now he's teaching me how to survive my adulthood. Paris wept. Catherine held the letter against her heart. This is what he wanted. Yet, not everyone welcomed the truth. Some voices accused the family of exploiting his memory. Prince answered them simply. He asked us to protect the truth. The book climbed every chart. But the most powerful moment came at a small memorial in Indiana, where a group of fans gathered with candles and copies of the journal. One woman stood and read aloud. If I ever mattered to you, then choose kindness today. No cameras, no press, just silence and tears. Jonathan later told Catherine, his voice is louder now than it ever was. But something else was stirring, because among the journal's pages was one final section, sealed by Michael himself. Jonathan discovered it while preparing the second edition. Inside was a single sentence, written in bold, deliberate letters. The greatest truth about my life has not been told yet. And beneath it, a name, one name that would reopen everything. What that name was would force the family to confront the final piece of Michael's story. The name stared up at Jonathan Pierce from the bottom of the page. He read it once, then again, then a third time. It didn't make sense at first, not because the name was unfamiliar, but because of what it represented. He closed the journal slowly and sat back in his chair, the weight of Michael's words settling heavily on his chest. Outside the window of his small office, Los Angeles moved on with its endless rhythm, unaware that something buried in ink was about to change the story of the most famous man who had ever lived. Jonathan drove to Havenhest that same afternoon. Catherine was in the garden, trimming roses, when she saw his face. What is it? She asked immediately. He held the journal against his chest. There's something you need to see. They went inside to Michael's old room. The light through the curtains was soft, almost golden, like it used to be when Michael would sit on the bed and write for hours, lost in his thoughts. Jonathan opened the journal and turned to the final section. He pointed. Catherine leaned in. Her breath caught. Why would he write her name here? She whispered. Jonathan shook his head. I don't know. But whatever it means, he wanted it known. The name belonged to a woman from Michael's past, Elena Ruiz. She was not famous. She was not part of the industry. And yet, her name appeared only once in the entire journal, in the final words. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed. I remember her, she said quietly. From years ago. He met her during a charity visit in Madrid. She was a volunteer. Jonathan nodded. There's more. He read aloud from the page. The greatest truth about my life has not been told yet. And when the time comes, Elena Ruiz will understand why. Catherine pressed her hand over her mouth. What truth? She whispered. Prince and Paris were called into the room. They read the page together in silence. Paris finally spoke. Did Dad love her? Jonathan exhaled. That's what I'm afraid of. The search began. It took weeks. Old travel records, charity event lists, archive photos. Finally, a lead. Elena Ruiz now lived in a small coastal town in northern Spain. She worked as a nurse in a hospice clinic. Jonathan flew there alone. He found the clinic on a quiet street overlooking the sea. When he asked for Elena, the receptionist pointed down the hall. She's with a patient. Jonathan waited. The woman who finally emerged from the room was old in the photos, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes calm, tired, kind. Elena Ruiz? He asked. She nodded. Yes. My name is Jonathan Pierce. I was Michael Jackson's assistant. Her face changed instantly. He handed her the journal. I think this belongs to you. Elena's hands trembled as she read the final page. She sat down slowly. He promised, she whispered. Jonathan's heart pounded. Promise what? That one day the truth would come out. They talked for hours. Elena told him everything. About the nights Michael had sat on the beach in Spain, barefoot, watching the waves. About how he said he felt invisible unless someone truly saw him. About how he had told her. He didn't believe he was meant for this world. He said loving me scared him. Elena whispered, because it felt real, and real things could be taken away. Jonathan listened in silence. Elena pulled a folded letter from her purse. "I was never supposed to show anyone this," she said, "but I think now I have to." The handwriting was unmistakable. Michael's. The letter was dated 2 months before his death. "Elena, if I do not come back, know that you were the only place I ever felt normal. The only place I was not performing. The only place my heart was quiet. I didn't tell the world because the world would have destroyed us. But I carried you with me every day." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. Elena closed the letter. "He knew he was leaving," she said. "He told me goodbye that night." Jonathan whispered, "The family needs to know." Elena nodded, and with that decision, the final wall protecting Michael's deepest truth began to fall. What would happen when the world learned who Elena Ruiz was would change Michael's legacy forever. Jonathan and Elena arrived in Los Angeles on a quiet morning when the city still felt half asleep. The ocean-gray sky hung low over the hills, as if even the weather sensed the weight of what they carried. Catherine was waiting at Havenhurst. She did not speak when she saw Elena. She only stepped forward and embraced her. For a long moment, the two women held each other, not as strangers, but as guardians of the same fragile truth. Inside Michael's old bedroom, Prince and Paris sat on the edge of the bed while Jonathan placed a journal and a letter on the table between them. Elena stood near the window, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Jonathan cleared his throat. She knew him in Spain, not as Michael Jackson, as Michael. Paris looked up. "What does that mean?" Elena finally turned toward them. Her voice was calm, but every word trembled beneath the surface. "It means he could breathe when he was with me." Silence filled the room. She told them everything. How she had met Michael during a charity visit in Madrid. How he returned weeks later alone, asking if they could walk by the sea. How they spoke for hours about childhood, loneliness, and the unbearable pressure of being adored by millions but known by almost no one. He said the world loved the idea of him, Elena whispered, but didn't know his heart. Prince stared at the floor. Paris listened without blinking. He didn't want this to be public. Elena continued. He said if the world touched it, it would turn into something ugly and loud. He wanted one part of his life to be quiet and real. Jonathan placed Michael's letter in front of Catherine. Catherine read it again. Then she nodded. "He was protecting you," she said, "and himself." They sat together for hours, crying, remembering, laughing at small details only love remembers. And then the question no one wanted to ask finally came. What do we do with this? Paris whispered. Catherine answered softly. We honor him. The next weeks unfolded like a storm. The family released a statement, not naming Elena, not exposing private details, only acknowledging that Michael had lived a life far more human, more fragile, more loving than the world ever knew. The media exploded anyway. Speculation, theories, headlines. Elena returned to Spain, her face hidden from cameras, her heart aching with both relief and loss. Jonathan stayed behind, watching the world struggle to reconcile the legend with the man. One night, Catherine called him into the living room. They're still forgetting him, she said. Jonathan nodded. Catherine held up Michael's journal. Then let his own words speak. They released a final excerpt, just one page. It read, I do not want to be remembered as a statue made of music. I want to be remembered as a man who loved, who was afraid, who tried, who failed, who hoped, who gave, who hurt, who healed, who lived. The reaction was immediate. Letters flooded Havenhurst again. Not from fans. From people. People who felt seen. People who had been lonely. People who had loved and lost and kept going. One message said, I thought I was broken for feeling this much. Now I know I'm just human. Paris held that letter to her chest and whispered, That's Dad. Months later, Elena returned quietly for a small private gathering. No press. No cameras. Only family. They stood at Forest Lawn as the sun set, the tomb glowing gold in the evening light. Elena placed a white rose at the base of the stone. He loved you all more than anything, she whispered. Catherine took her hand. and you were part of his life. That means you are part of this family." They stood in silence, and in that silence, the truth finally fell whole. But one last piece remained, because Michael's story was not yet finished. The final chapter would reveal what was discovered inside the tomb and why it changed everything. The morning light at Forest Lawn felt different that day. Not brighter, not warmer, quieter. Catherine arrived first, walking slowly up the path that led to Michael's tomb. The marble walls reflected the pale sky, and for a moment the world seemed suspended between breath and memory. Jonathan, Prince, Paris, and Blanket followed. No reporters, no cameras, only the people who loved him. They entered the private chamber, where Michael's crypt rested behind smooth stone. The air inside was cool, still, sacred. Jonathan approached the wall. "This is where the box was," he said softly. Prince stepped closer, tracing the marble with his fingers. And inside that box, Jonathan nodded, was the truth. They stood there in silence, letting the weight of the years settle into that small space. Paris finally whispered. He knew this day would come. Catherine placed her hand against the stone. He prepared for it. He didn't want the world to bury his heart with his body. They sat on the bench near the crypt and opened the journal one last time, not to search for answers, but to remember. Jonathan read aloud. "If my story ever feels confusing, remember this. Everything I did because I loved, even when I was afraid. Especially when I was afraid." Blanket wiped his eyes. Prince exhaled slowly. "I wish I had known him longer." Catherine smiled sadly. "You did, through his love." Outside, the late afternoon sun began to fade. Jonathan stood and carefully pressed the journal against his chest. "Michael asked me to make sure one thing happened." They all looked at him. He said when the family finally understood everything, to leave something of his behind, not hidden, not secret. Jonathan reached into his jacket and removed the small silver locket. They all recognized it. Jonathan opened it. The two photographs still rested inside, the boy on stage, and the father on the floor with his children. Jonathan walked to the crypt and gently placed the open locket at the base of the stone. "For the world to see," he whispered. They stepped back, and in that moment, something inside all of them loosened, because Michael Jackson was no longer only the man the world imagined. He was the man they knew, a son, a father, a lover, a child who never stopped searching for love, a heart that beat far louder than the music. As they turned to leave, Paris stopped and looked back at the tomb. "I think he's finally at peace." Catherine nodded. "Yes, because the truth is no longer buried." They walked away as the evening sky deepened. The world would keep dancing to his songs. It would keep chanting his name. But now, somewhere between the marble and the memory, Michael Jackson's heart was finally understood. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Michael Jackson. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Michael Jackson.